Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the 11th annual Amy Parrish Scleroderma Education event. I'm Rick Silver, co-director of the Scleroderma Center at the Medical University of South Carolina, and it's a pleasure to be with you. I regret that we're not all together in person in Charleston. I'm actually coming to you from Brevard, North Carolina, and this session is being pre-recorded since I may not have complete internet access on February 13th, but I do hope to be available for questions and answers following this presentation. Before we begin, I want to congratulate Susan, Karen, Francis, all the members of the chapter and those who work so hard at MUSC to put together these annual education conferences. And I want to congratulate the chapter for receiving the Outstanding Education Program Award this past year, 2020. And this makes the second time in the past 10 years that the South Carolina chapter has received this award. And I'm very grateful for everybody's support and for the opportunity you have given our patients to learn more about scleroderma. Research is hope. This is one of the mantras of the Scleroderma Foundation and those of us at MUSC whose career is devoted to the care and the research for patients with scleroderma. And over the years, MUSC and the Scleroderma Foundation have had a very strong and I think unique relationship. And in the next few minutes, I'd just like to highlight that relationship and how it has sustained the research efforts at MUSC as well as other institutions. These are some figures that I think illustrate the relationship that the Scleroderma Foundation has with the Medical University of South Carolina and its investigators. So since the inception of the Scleroderma Foundation, which came out of the merger of two other scleroderma foundations, there have been 27 research grants awarded to investigators at the Medical University. There overall have been 10 individual researchers who have received such funding. And if you go back of the 30 years that the Scleroderma Foundation has been providing research support, 1 or 2 grants have been awarded to MUSC in 21 of the 30 years. The grant process that the Scleroderma Foundation uses it mirrors that of the NIH. It is a peer-reviewed process where grants are competitively reviewed and scored by individuals who have no conflict of interest. It's a very competitive process and one that is really, I think, the standard for fairness to the investigators who are applying for such awards. My first grant was received in 1989 from the United Scleroderma Foundation, one of the organizations that was a forerunner of the current Scleroderma Foundation. And that grant was for the amount of $25,000, which doesn't seem like very much right now, but back in 1989 was a considerable grant, particularly for a young investigator who was launching his investigative career in the field of scleroderma. And this grant enabled me to devote time to my area of particular interest, which was scleroderma lung disease. And as you know, at the time in the 1989, renal crisis was becoming less of an issue, and lung disease was becoming more of an issue for our patients. So this was both timely and very crucial for my career. And fast forward to more current times, 2019, MUSC investigators received 2 of the Scleroderma Foundation awards, now in the amount of $150,000, over 2 or 3 years. And these grants have been very important to sustaining the scleroderma research at MUSC. If one looks back over the past 5 years, you can see a total of 5 grants in the total amount of $750,000 have been awarded by the Scleroderma Foundation to MUSC investigators. And if you go back to 1989 and add up all of the grants to MUSC investigators, that number approaches $3 million. This slide shows the 10 investigators who have received grants from the Scleroderma Foundation over the last 30 years or so. Now, some of these investigators have moved on. Some have retired. For example, Elena Torquina has retired and moved to Portland, Oregon, where her grandchildren live. Anna Ludwicka Bradley, not shown in the picture here, she has moved back to her native country of Poland. Dr. Jim Norris, who became the chairman of the Department of Microbiology and Immunology at the Medical University, is now Professor Emeritus. I'll tell you a little bit more about Maria Trojanowska in a moment, and Rebecca Lee has moved on. But on the top row, we see investigators who are still actively conducting research at MUSC and who all have received funding from the Scleroderma Foundation. And I'd like just to tell you a little bit more about these particular investigators. So here's Maria Trojanowska. She really is a success story. She was a homegrown product of the Medical University of South Carolina. She came to MUSC to do her postdoctoral fellowship and got interested in fibrosis research. She came to the Division of Rheumatology and worked with Dr. Leroy and later with myself. And she became one of the leaders in the field studying the molecular and the cellular mechanisms of fibrosis. All told, during her tenure at MUSC as a faculty member, Maria received $500,000 in funding from the National Scleroderma Foundation. To our chagrin, she was recruited away several years ago to become the director of the Arthritis and Autoimmune Diseases Research Center at Boston University School of Medicine. And fortunately for all of us, Maria remains very active as a scleroderma researcher, and also, I must say, has played a very important role as a reviewer of grants and an advisor to the Scleroderma Foundation. So we're very proud that Maria began her career at MUSC and has continued it at Boston University. As I mentioned, my first grant was that $25,000 grant from the United Scleroderma Foundation. And now I work with Galina Bogatkevich, and in our lab, we are studying primarily scleroderma lung fibrosis. All told, since 1989, our lab has garnered $1.1 million in funding from the Scleroderma Foundation. And these funds have enabled us to conduct research looking at what is going on in the respiratory tract of patients with scleroderma. We were among the first group of investigators to show that fibrosis in the lungs of people with scleroderma is characterized by an inflammatory and an immune process in the lower respiratory tract. We were among the first to demonstrate the role of thrombin, which is a clotting factor, in the pathogenesis of scleroderma lung disease. And we've shown recently that a medication that blocks thrombin, an anticoagulant, a blood thinner, if you will, is a potential treatment for patients with scleroderma lung disease. And also recently, we've discovered a new molecule, which we call M10, which is a peptide, naturally occurring peptide that has some antifibrotic process. And we're in the process of developing this molecule as a potential therapeutic agent. All of this research has been supported by grants from the Scleroderma Foundation and other sources, but could not have been accomplished if we hadn't received that $25,000 grant in 1989. So currently we are continuing our research on lung fibrosis, and we are developing this molecule M10 as a potential therapeutic agent for scleroderma. And I'm happy to report that based on the research and this research support that we have had from the Scleroderma Foundation, we recently received a 2-year, $500,000 grant from Boehringer Ingelheim Pharmaceuticals to look at lung fibroblasts from scleroderma patients before and after being treated with a thrombin inhibitor. So the seed money received over the years from the foundation has led to other extramural support. We have a grant pending at the NIH to further develop this peptide M10 as a potential therapeutic agent, and hopefully that will also prove to be a successful endeavor. The Hoffman Lab has been involved in scleroderma research for many years and has received support from the Scleroderma Foundation dating back to 1992 and totaling about $700,000. This is Dr. Hoffman here, all masked up in his lab, speaking with Charlie Reese, a graduate student, and I'm happy to report that Charlie will be receiving his PhD after many years of study and research in Stan Hoffman's lab. And we hope that Charlie will continue his interest in scleroderma and will become a very valuable member of our team. So the Hoffman Lab, with the support of the Scleroderma Foundation, has discovered that the activity of a particular protein called caveolin is lower than normal when looked at in scleroderma fibroblasts and also in scleroderma monocytes, cells of the innate immune system. And they have shown that if you can return that level, that activity level to normal, they can make a scleroderma fibroblast behave more like a normal fibroblast. They have developed in the Hoffman Lab a peptide called CSD peptide, which can restore normal caveolin activity to scleroderma fibroblasts. And the goal of their research, supported in part by the Scleroderma Foundation, is to restore normal fibroblast activity and reduce fibrosis. Here is some slides from a recent experiment conducted in the Hoffman Lab looking at lung fibrosis. So this is under control here. This is a section of lung from a mouse that has been treated with saline or salt water. And this is what a normal lung appears as. If you treat that mouse, however, with an agent called bleomycin, you can induce fibrosis, and you can see that this lung no longer resembles the normal lung shown on the left. And all of this blue staining is fibrosis. If the mouse is also treated with this peptide developed in the Hoffman laboratory, you can see that this fibrosis is very much attenuated, and this lung looks much more like the normal control lung than the fibrosis lung. So the Hoffman Lab, again, with the support in the past of the Scleroderma Foundation, is in the process of developing this CSD peptide as a potential therapy. This is Paula Ramos, who also is another success story. So Paula was recruited to the Medical University of South Carolina a number of years ago, largely because of her interest in lupus and the genetic aspects of lupus. But we've been able to seduce Paula into studying scleroderma as well. And in 2019, Paula Ramos received one of the Scleroderma Foundation's new investigators awards. So this is $50,000 each year for 3 years to study and to conduct her experiments, which is to look at the monocytes or blood cells of scleroderma patients and to determine how they differ from normal monocytes and to look for potential new targets for treatment. Another success story, Deanna Baker Frost, who received her MD PhD from the Medical University of South Carolina and has now joined the faculty as an assistant professor. And Deanna is looking at the relationship between hormones, particularly estrogen, and fibrosis. And she works closely and is mentored by our own Carol Fagali-Bostwick, and under her mentorship has already begun to make important contributions. And later within the next 30 days, Deanna will be submitting a K08 grant to the NIH, which will provide her hopefully with 5 years of support and protection so that she can devote 75% of her time to scleroderma research. The remainder of her time will be spent in clinical care and other academic pursuits. But we're very proud of Deanna Baker Frost, and she is teaming up with Paula Ramos, has recently published this paper looking at differences in the DNA of patients with scleroderma and finding differences amongst African American patients compared to those with a European descent. So I think that this team, with co-mentorship from Carol Fagali-Bostwick, is likely to find a lot of interesting new findings for scleroderma patients that hopefully will translate into better care. So 2019 was a big year for MUSC when it comes to Scleroderma Foundation awards. That year, I'm not sure exactly how many awards were funded. Perhaps there were as many as 8, but 2 of them came to MUSC investigators. So I mentioned the first one going to Paula Ramos as a new investigator. Dr. Sal received $150,000 over 2 years as an established investigator award. And this is Betty Sal, one of our endowed professors at MUSC, who also was recruited primarily for her interest in the genetics of lupus, but now is becoming interested in the genetics of scleroderma as well. And Betty and her colleagues, her lab colleagues as shown here, have found a significant genetic association of a variant, and has now shown that this is seen in Chinese patients with scleroderma and is also present in scleroderma patients of European descent. They are now conducting research which appears to show that if you genetically modify mice so that you give them this particular variant, they will develop lung fibrosis, which is an indication that this variant, which is found in some scleroderma patients, may be one of the principal causes of fibrosis, particularly lung fibrosis, and again may present a new or potential target for treatment. And for some reason, my slideshow, I want to just go back to this slide. So I want to conclude now. Dr. Fagali-Bostwick, as you know, plays a major role not only as co-director of the Scleroderma Center at MUSC, and here is Carol, shown by the many people working in her lab, all carefully protected, but still working quite diligently. But in addition, Carol plays a major role, leadership role with the Scleroderma Foundation. And she therefore does not apply for Scleroderma Foundation grants herself, because that would present perhaps a conflict of interest. But Carol has been very busy and very productive, and her lab is working hard to identify the triggers that may induce fibrosis in patients with scleroderma and other fibrosing lung disease. As you know, she's been working with a biotech company to develop a molecule that she discovered that has anti-fibrotic processes, and hopefully this will translate into a new therapy for people with scleroderma. So I just want to conclude. I've given you a snapshot of the scleroderma research that's ongoing at MUSC, and I tried to highlight the relationship, the close relationship that MUSC investigators has had with the Scleroderma Foundation over the years. And this is why I've been dedicated much of my time to the Scleroderma Foundation, both as a member of their medical advisory board here locally in the South Carolina with our chapter, and of course fundraising through the Thomas Mills event, which occurs every year. So I urge you to do what you can do in terms of fundraising for the Scleroderma Foundation, supporting our local chapter in their fundraising endeavors, and considering the Scleroderma Foundation for your own charitable giving. Whatever we get from South Carolina, I think you will agree, comes back tenfold or more to the researchers at MUSC. And I should mention that $3 million in funding over the last 30 years from the Scleroderma Foundation probably translates into $30 or $60 million in federal funding that would not have come to MUSC if we did not have the pilot data and preliminary data that was generated through funding for research by the Scleroderma Foundation. So on that note, I will stop my presentation. We can stop the recording. And again, I hope to see you or at least speak with you on February 13th, and I would be happy to answer any questions you may have at that time.